The following is rated TV MALSV. It contains strong language, violence, and nudity. It is intended only for mature audiences.
Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome to Darkroom, where the hidden becomes known. This is your host, Devious Dave Rose, and today is March 14th, 2019. And on this episode, we'll be discussing As the World Burns. And there is, so much to discuss that's going on this week throughout the world in geopolitics. So we're going to get right down into it. Now, let's start off in East Asia, for example, where you have China trying to exert their force in the South China Sea. Just the other day, a Vietnamese fishing boat was essentially rammed by Chinese territorial maritime ships and sunk. And this is something that the Chinese have been doing for a long time, not just to the Vietnamese, but also to the Filipinos, to essentially anybody living in that corridor. Even, for example, Taiwanese. And it is extremely concerning considering the fact that they are building a fortress, essentially, or multiple fortresses throughout the South China Sea and in the Spratly Islands. Now they're essentially preparing themselves to have a beachhead for running a war against Taiwan and the rest of the region, because China wants to extend its hegemony, aka its influence, over that region. And it's extremely important because a lot of people don't know that under the South China Sea there is a lot of mineral resources, including oil, natural gas, and other resources that essentially are very valuable for those that are able to claim them and use political force to back them up. So we have a situation that is heating up in East Asia. And the Taiwanese have always tried to, for the most part, try to acquiesce to China and work with them. But China sees them as essentially a breakaway province. And they're going to use their increasing political and military force and economic force to essentially cripple them and attempt to get them to come into the fold. And it's extremely dangerous because we see what happens with Hong Kong, for example, where they have this idea that you can run two systems consecutively, one with people that already experience freedom and know capitalism as it should work, as opposed to those that have been deprived of it living on mainland China. And you see on the crackdown on political dissidents in Hong Kong that clearly any sort of system that's based on liberty is incompatible with the current Chinese political system. And we can't even call it communist because it's not. It's much more a corporatist or a fascist system. They lean much more onto the corporations that build up their nation, and they obviously provide favoritism to those. So we clearly see that China is not the communist nation that they claim to be. We have Japan, which is responding to this. They've made big orders for F-35 combat vehicles, as well as increasing their carrier capacity to allow them to launch attack helicopters and these F-35 fighters to combat any potential menace that China might try to force onto Japan. So I think it's important that people consider that despite the fact that you might not be hearing this on regular news, that it's very much affecting the prices of oil, the prices of stock futures, the prices of resources, and it can definitely disbalance, a world economic system, which is what we currently have, where many nations are sort of tied to the other. And if one is affected, multiple more are as well. Now, what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to move from East Asia, or the Orient, which is no longer considered politically correct to say. I'm actually going to move to Southeast Asia, where we've got India and Pakistan feuding for influence in the region and territorial and border conflicts and such. But I received a very interesting comment the other day from Sam Khan, so I'd like to just shout him out right now and just show some appreciation for the interaction that he provided, and just read the comment that he left on the Darkroom episode number 1, The Coming Wars video. Hi, Dave. Interesting video as always. I don't always agree with you, but what you say is no... But what you say... Sorry. I don't always agree with what you say, but there's no doubting you are an intelligent individual and do a lot of research. Something a lot of people are overlooking is in the possible India-Pakistan war is the fact that India's elections are very close. April, I think. And some have accused the current government of using the potential war to get people jingoistic and get them back into power. If this war would go ahead, who would you feel would be the main beneficiary? As both countries with nuclear power would destroy each other, so clearly not them, would it be China? Would also love to hear a video opinion about what you think about the Syrian pipeline conspiracy. So not only am I going to address Sam Khan's thoughts in regards to the Southeast Asian conflict that we're currently seeing, I will also address what we're going to be discussing with Syria. So my response, I think, is very important to reply with. But you nailed it. China wants hegemony in the region, and they have the claim to the Kashmir as well. Also, great points about the election. I could have done a full episode just on that topic, but as your reference, it's the nuance that people normally don't take into consideration regarding domestic distraction. And I'm putting an emphasis on there just to highlight what I'm talking about. Domestic distraction. Now, this is going to apply to many things that we're going to be speaking about on this channel in the future. Keep that word in mind and understand that it doesn't just apply to this situation, it applies to every situation in politics. So, I'll just repeat that. It's the nuance that the people don't normally take into consideration regarding domestic distraction, like this armed conflict possibly demonstrates. Regarding the Syrian pipeline, it's definitely no conspiracy, just just how the same sort of issue precipitated the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan. And I just want to again thank Sam Khan for adding his input, because I think it's always important to interact with people and get more information when it comes to topics that either people are unaware of, or even myself, for example. I don't know everything. And the problem is also that all of us are essentially almost held hostage by the media industrial complex that wishes to control the flow of information. So you can spend a lot of time, like I have, to dig for information, to really try to find out what is out there. But it's difficult because it's so hard to get past these gatekeepers that keep this truth hidden. And even with platforms like Twitter, where you're supposed to be able to hear from people who are basically right there where the action is happening, maybe even during a political protest or something, Twitter right now is just on the bend to just ban anything that does not agree with them. And this isn't, it's not just in North America with conservatives. We're talking about dissidents in Iran, for example, who are burning their hijabs or whatever head coverings and getting arrested. And these videos are being filmed and they're getting taken down, not by an Iranian company or in Saudi Arabia, same example, but by an American company, which is mostly, the biggest portion of that ownership does belong to a Saudi Arabian prince, but that's another issue that we can talk about. But regardless, it's an American company that's making a decision for foreign governments. You have individuals in the United States that are being sued by foreign entities and governments, and Twitter is essentially allowing them to act, like basically acting as a party to serve that individual with these legal papers. It's insane. But let's go back here to the geopolitics. Just got to take a drink here. Got to stay hydrated as always. Now, since we're already talking about the Southeast Asian region, and we've alluded a bit to Syria, let's go to the Middle East right now. Again, I do thank Sam Khan for bringing this topic up. It's not something that many people talk about, but it is a tale as old as time, as they say. And I'm actually going to take this moment to put some graphics up here. Again, I'm not the greatest broadcaster, unfortunately, but I am trying my best. More importantly, it's information that needs to be brought out. Now, the graphic that I've just put up on the screen that you should see in a moment is essentially two different pipelines that have been planned, and they essentially go through Syria. And what I want to talk about right now is what Sam Khan was talking about. Now, I really do hope that the Google, YouTube, AI algorithms don't flag this video for me even saying the word conspiracy. But it happened with another word that starts with an F, and, well, there's two words. They both start with an F. And we saw what happened last time with that. So I'm just hoping this video doesn't get taken down. Now, excuse me. Got a little phlegm there from the cold I'm recovering from. But let's go back to what I'm discussing right now, which, again, is the topic that was brought up. What's going on in Syria? Why is it that we don't hear much about it, but when we do, it's always a decision to either invade or to send some sort of support to rebels, and then there's always some sort of conflict with some sort of other countries like Russia? when you really start to dig deep into this, you start to realize that it all comes together in a big plan. Now, there was essentially a group called the Project for the New American Century. And I'll tell you why that rings familiar to you in a moment. But back in 2000, they had essentially suggested this: to allow pipeline to go through Qatar, Saudi Arabia, through Syria and Jordan and Turkey to get to Europe. Now, this group would also come about to say that no less than a Pearl Harbor attack event on the United States would be needed to accomplish this. And in just over a year, on September 11th, 2001, we got carte blanche and a green light to not only go into Afghanistan, but to blame Iraq for somehow being involved in that. But if you take a look into their papers, into their actual documents, which I have, and many other documents that precede it, because again, if you start to take a look at who's involved in these projects and how often they've been featured in the American political administration of the, U.S. president or one of the political parties, you start to see who's involved and where their loyalties lie. And in regards to this particular political experiment, it was always desired to balkanize the Middle East. What's that mean? Basically, break it up along ethnic lines, which we saw perfectly in Iraq after the 2003 invasion. That rather than have it unified, despite all these different ethnicities living under relative understanding, and that's not to say Iraq, didn't have extremely repressive controls put on its people. But there was a sort of enforced peace. And when you destroy the ruling power and create that void, you allow for this balkanization to occur. So that's exactly what's been planned for the Middle East for probably more than 30 years. Because again, if you look into the documents of these think tanks, of these PACs, these super PACs, these organizations that are set up to lobby politicians to essentially vote for insanity, you see that this has been there for quite some time. And we also have to consider that even in Israeli political documents, they have stated that they would rather have chaos going on in the Middle East rather than all these sort of stable governments. Now, that's a very interesting thing as to why an American ally would want to have chaos on their doorstep. And declassified CIA documents actually reveal that there was a plan to destroy Syria to enact and enforce this oil pipeline. There's already mountains of proof of material, financial support for these, in quotations, Syrian rebels. But are they really rebels? If you start to draw the lines, start to see the programs that were enforced and enacted, not just by Barack Obama, but by even George Bush Jr., you see that not only ISIS was created by this opportunity, but weapons that have been recovered from these jihadi terrorists can be traced immediately to these operations that have been set up by the CIA and other intelligence organizations to allow for them to fight a proxy war, just like they did in Afghanistan or many other places. You don't necessarily have to have your guys there, but if you train the fighters and you give them the money, you give them the weapons, you give them intelligence alerts as to where their targets are going to be, you don't have to have any involvement. It's essentially allows you to run a covert war without getting your hands dirty. But this isn't new. I mean, we already know that the United States, and that's just one country. I mean, Russia, the United Kingdom, France, Belgium, and on, have all done the same thing. They all basically want the same thing. They want power and control. And we see, for example, how France opposed the Iraq War because they had investments in Iraq at that point. But you also see Canada, for example, that had people that were trying to protect Gaddafi when they were trying to depose him, who weren't really interested in the freedom and opposing American imperialism, if you want to call it that, but because they were also making deals with Gaddafi and trying to benefit from it. So there really isn't any sort of loyalty or admiration for a country's sovereignty. It's no holds barred, and any opportunity that you can get in there to benefit and exploit a potential adversary, that's what they're going to do. Now, before I move on, I'm just going to look in the chat here. I don't see anybody in there at the moment. But if you have any questions in regards to what we're talking about tonight, please either put them in the chat, or you can even give me a call on Skype at Devious Dave Rose, and we can perhaps have a discussion and hear what you have to say. But let's move on. Actually, before we move on in regards to Syria, because again, I do appreciate that this topic was brought to my attention, but look at also right now that's not being announced in the news is that Syria is actually announcing that they're going to commence war against Israel for their position on the Golan Heights, and are essentially demanding that they move, or they're going to begin some sort of attack. And obviously, Iran, for example, is more than willing to support that, and that's only going to incur, American interaction and such. But we're not hearing about that, and I think we should. I mean, there are constant attacks between both sides, and you never hear about that, but you do hear about the need to fund one side or another, either Israel through arms or the Palestinians through humanitarian aid. So there's really no interest in solving the problem. It's let's fund both sides, which is the astute thing to do when you're not interested in peace. And you can allow for balkanization, for chaos in a region that you want to have control in. So I did want to mention that. Now let's move on, because there's a few other places in the world where we have some very interesting occurrences happening. Let's move to Venezuela. Now, I can absolutely assure you that you are not hearing the truth as to what's going on there, but it is absolutely horrific. They're now facing what I believe is the fifth or sixth day without power throughout the entire country. There's spotty power in certain areas, but for the most part, essentially total blackout. Any food stores that they had have gone rotten. You need about 24 hours for that to occur. There's no talk about it other than how America is bad for opposing the socialism that Venezuela has put forward. But when they talk about how people are eating from the trash or taking sewer water because their taps put out black garbage, it's absolutely true. For those that are actually able to transmit this information in Venezuela, they are getting exactly that information out. They're showing that essentially the country has collapsed, that there's massive numbers of people suffering, and a recent video that actually went viral showed that Venezuelans were at an area where there was sewage water coming out, and they were trying to collect it because their taps didn't work. They didn't have the ability to collect any other water, and they were there collecting polluted water because they couldn't find any other source. But nobody is talking about this. And unfortunately, as I spoke about earlier, a political vacuum is being formed. And Venezuela, being an ally of Russia, and America being an ally of Colombia, which is right next door, are going to definitely want to fill that vacuum. So, are we going to see armed conflict there? I believe so. In fact, there's already been armed conflict with aid packages being delivered, although there has been some sort of faking in regards to that, because both sides want war. They want conflict. They want the ability to, because this is always a great domestic distraction, as I spoke about. This is essentially not only something that they can utilize to wage war for resources, but they can utilize it for patriotic means, for political means, and it just is something that will lead to some sort of conflict within the region, and unfortunately, in the end, the people are the ones that are going to be suffering. I mean, they're already suffering as it is, and it is very sad that basically right after World War II, Venezuela was one of the sixth richest countries in the world. They were the most powerful economy in South America. They were richer than China. They had amazing health care, and literally within half a century, they've been destroyed. Despite the fact that they have all these amazing resources that they could utilize to benefit their country. And it's all because of this Bolivarian socialism that was pushed by Chavez. And it led to the ruin of a once great nation. It's a very sad instance and situation, but it can't be denied what led to that ruin. Now, am I going to excuse American political involvement in the rest of Latin America with their removal and coups of properly elected individuals? No. But then again, Russia was also involved in the same sort of thing, so I can't excuse them either. And more importantly, in the end, the people are the ones that decide their destiny. And the Venezuelans themselves were the ones that actually voted for removing their ability to own guns, for their gun rights. Now that's sad, but that's essentially signing over your right to defend yourself. And now we see, because there are literal well, they're left wing in this case, death squads going through the streets of Venezuela, finding dissidents that have either posted things on social media or have just made a clamor, and they're executing them right there in the street. And you can see these videos on LiveLeak, for example. YouTube is trying to censor them, especially because they are trying to push socialistic politicians in the United States like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. But you can find these videos, and they are truly infuriating. There's no other way to say it. These people are being killed because they just want their country to return to normal. And unfortunately, when somebody like Donald Trump talks about trying to hold these people accountable, he gets called a hate monger and a warmonger, despite the fact that the Democratic Party wishes to remain in Syria, causing war there. And of course, we can't deny the fact that this would be very profitable for the military-industrial complex. You know, war always is. There's also all these organizations and companies that want to get their hands on these resources. This is it. I mean, it's the tale as old as time. So you're definitely going to have a lobbying push on the political American system to go to war or to get involved at some level to interact and change the sort of stream as to where Venezuela is heading. Because right now there really is no, I mean, look what's going on. Like, it's either going to be civil war or there's going to have to be some sort of international intervention. You know that's going to be voted down in the UN. That there's not going to be any peacekeepers going to Venezuela. Colombia feels threatened as well, and they are actually preparing their border for war. That's also something that's not being discussed. And it's almost guaranteed there's going to be some sort of conflict. Now, maybe it's going to be like the first Gulf War, where it's only going to be strategic hits using Tomahawk missiles, and there won't be actual invasion. I can't say, either way what's going to happen, at least at the moment. But the cards are being set up. The dominoes are being set up. This is basically in the cards. And there's ways to derail this. There is. But, again, those that rule war, who are the lords of war, they've got a lot of money, they've got a lot of patience, and they've got a lot of connections. These individuals can set these things up decades in advance and just get all the pieces in place to allow it to occur. Like I said, it can be derailed, but when you take a look at the enemy, they plan much further ahead into the future than many of those on the good side. Now, before I go on, I'm just going to go to the chat here because I see that High IQ Thoughts has added something. He says, how can this information benefit us? Well, in many ways. For one, if I'm reminding you of a topic that you're not aware of, you may look further into it. Perhaps I'm mentioning how the media, controls what information gets out there, and it reminds you of a website that has information that isn't commonly available. The whole point of the matter here is just to bring to light what is going on in the world. And it's up to all of us to remind others about this and to try to make the world a better place. Because without this information, if we're all ignorant, then there's no way to overcome that ignorance. We have to be aware and share that information with others. Something that I've spoken about actually on this show previously is about critical mass. It's a difficult thing, and I'm not always very positive about it, but statistically, especially with the psychic unconscious that exists and connects all humans, which has been proven, if you can reach a critical mass of knowledge, it allows people not only to be able to confront a certain issue, but to be able to overcome it. So, a little convoluted in regards to my response, but I think I answered it fairly well. So we're going to go back to the list of what's been going on. So we spoke about Venezuela, which is very sad and unfortunate. And it really does look like what's going to happen in either Panama or Nicaragua in the 80s with these limited military interventions. So we may just be heading in that direction. But now that we're already on the American continent, let's move north and talk about America itself. Now, the current political climate is even crazier than it was 2 months ago. We have this whole Mueller report, which is going to be released shortly. Strangely, book publishers were able to already post information, announce that they were going to be selling it well prior to the official printing date. That does make you question. But the whole purpose, as publicly stated on the Mueller report, was to find Russian collusion. And it was publicly admitted multiple times by people involved in the investigation that there was absolutely no Russian collusion. But on cue, as I absolutely knew they would, they shifted the goalposts and they moved on to another topic and continued to tout that impeachment was the end game and that they were now going to reinvestigate the whole Mueller report. So even after, for 2 years and about $30 million worth of an investigation, they decide that it's not good enough, that now Mueller is somehow in cahoots, and they want to move on to find any sort of dirt. Now you would think, I mean, the Secret Service already knew about Bill Clinton's philandering well before he even was elected. And they haven't found one piece of dirt on Trump that essentially sticks. I mean, there's a reason why they call him Teflon Don. So it just goes to show that they're not interested in any conclusion of truth. They're just interested in a conclusion that agrees with their ultimate goal, which is to remove Trump from power, even if illegally. Now, in regards to the U.S. political climate, this new individual has shown up on the political scene. And his name is... Sorry, let me just... Yeah, I want it to be absolutely sure I'm saying it properly. But his name is Andrew Yang. And essentially he's wanting to run for the 2020 presidential election. You're going to probably start to see a lot more about this individual. And I can assure you that he is a Manchurian candidate, no pun intended. He's proposing universal income, which is essentially an absolute socialist plan and would bankrupt any sort of normal government. He's got ideas that aren't compatible with the current political system, but he's attempting to use disenfranchised youth to push his campaign and get him sort of to distract the vote. Now, there's a lot that I could talk about this individual, but I will talk about him in the future. I do recommend you look into him, though, because there's a lot of sneaky things in regards to this individual, and if you're on certain message boards that are a little more woke, you'll know that the Yang Gang is out there brigading and posting information in an attempt to control the social narrative. So I would advise you to keep your eyes out for this individual and just know that there's a lot more to him than he's revealing about himself. Now, I'm moving on to a very interesting topic. A topic I think that's a lot deeper than you might even consider. Now, yesterday, Wednesday, March the 13th, 2019, Facebook encountered a massive outage which lasted most of the day. I think it's very important to mention this because many people don't think about it, but when you start to draw the lines and you start to do the research, it all comes together. Anytime there's a massive outage on social media, consider it scrubbing time. There are individuals that are attempting to scrub, to remove information from the public record to cover their trails. You see it often, very often, especially with certain events that, again, if I was to say the word, this channel and video would probably be flagged, but both words starts with an F, and basically you could consider it unreal cloth that represents a country. So there was an outage to scrub this stuff. What stuff specifically are you asking? A while ago, it came out that DARPA, a organization that is set up specifically to not only fund but to produce certain solutions, military solutions that are a little untraditional. DARPA stands for Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. They've been involved in a lot of different things. In regards to this, because they get a lot of funding from the CIA. They created LifeLog. LifeLog essentially is the precursor to Facebook. The whole plan was to accrue information to allow to add to a NSA database, as well as for them to create psychological profiles and political profiles on individuals that would utilize these sorts of platforms. The day before Facebook was launched, the LifeBlog project got supposedly canceled. But strangely, the technology that was developed for LifeBlog was then utilized by Facebook. So if you consider how there have been outages in the past with Facebook, they haven't lasted too long. But the one the other day, especially with the release of information on LifeBlog, coincides perfectly with why it was down for so long. I'm just going to go here now back to the chat. We have High IQ Thoughts writing some more. Looks like he's switching the topic a little bit, but why not? Let's go to his comments here. So IQ Thoughts says, what about alien greys abducting civilians and coming to an agreement with the government? Scary stuff. Then he says, all of these classified projects are inactive at this time. Well, it's a very official response, I would say, because that would be my response if I was running that sort of program. But despite the fact that they might cancel a certain project, but again, there's two types of projects, white projects and black projects. They might cancel a white project like the Venture Star X-33 single stage to orbit glider system, but it doesn't mean that that information wasn't absorbed by a black project to build on all the public funding that was provided on there, and then just to further develop it without having to spend as much and still be able to utilize that technology. But you were saying about alien greys abducting civilians. Now, I honestly do believe that the majority of the encounters that people have documented and claimed in regards to being abducted by alien greys are due to a mental manipulation. It's not that I'm saying that they didn't happen. What I'm saying is that what the individuals perceived as gray aliens abducting them weren't aliens. Whether it be some sort of military project to abduct individuals for testing purposes, or it might be an interdimensional being that is attempting to interact with that individual, I can't say. But the pop culture mentality and idea that's been put into people about these individuals sleeping in bed, and then they see a light at the window, and then this gray alien appears, and then they get taken to a ship, and they get probed, and I do believe that that's probably a psychological operation, or like there's a lot of aspects to it that fit with a psychological operation. And when you take into other things into consideration that are mentioned in regards to these sort of black projects to essentially test genetically certain individuals, you can see the benefit of trying to hide that, utilizing sort of cover of gray aliens abducting individuals. I split this up because I think this is also a separate aspect of what you're asking, high IQ thoughts, but coming to an agreement with the government. Now, back in about 1953, I believe, the rumor has it that Eisenhower met with a certain number of extraterrestrial aliens, whatever you want to call them, at a base. I believe it was Edwards Air Force Base, to sort of have a discussion in regards to creating a treaty. I think there's a lot of disinformation in that, to be quite honest. We cannot deny that in 1952, the U.S. Capitol basically got buzzed by at least 10 UFOs. There's videos of it, there's photos of it, but essentially they just buzzed over the Capitol in formation, in a perfect formation, to grab attention of the U.S. political system. Now, we can't forget that, rewind even further back, and in 1947, Admiral Byrd did launch Operation High Jump in Antarctica with a massive amount of troops and attack planes, and they conducted their operation early. And there's a lot of information there that we could definitely go into, but I think maybe that will be for another time. All right. Now, I just remind you that if you do want to have your voice heard here on the show, on the Darkroom, feel free to give me a call on Skype at Devious Dave Rose. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them there in the chat on YouTube. So, we spoke a little bit about Facebook and the recent outage, and they are actually being taken to court. The U.S. government is suing Facebook in regards to their usage of people's private information. But we are at a point where essentially we are in a technocracy, where those that value technology over everything else are the ones pushing social policy. And many people of those individuals I'm speaking about are transhumanists. They don't believe in a human. They believe in transcending that. They want to be able to build artificial bodies, cyborg suits, and they want to be able to inhabit them and transfer their psyche and soul into that being. I just want to acknowledge, before I continue, Joe Cronin's show there in the chat, telling me that my microphone is still buzzing, and I do apologize to all the listeners who might be hearing that right now. I'm hoping to have that addressed in the near future, but you do what you can. As a famous man once said, you push with the cock you got. Now feel free to call in, Joe Cronin, if you'd like to talk about some geopolitics. Perhaps you might have something to say in regards to all that we've discussed tonight, or perhaps you have a new topic that you would like to bring to the table. But I was just talking about how we have these transhumanists that value transcendence, the desire to be immortal, essentially. But once you take those steps, you're no longer human. And when you start to take a look at the greater elite, those with substantial amount of wealth, you start to see that that is their goal. Might sound strange, but all the information really does back that up. And if we talk about ancient cultures, we clearly recognize that this has always been the desire of the elite, even in olden days, to live forever, to be immortal, to rule. And as we enter this new technological century with more automation, with more of these cyborgs and robots and artificial intelligences that are being created, we are basically heading to a forefront. There's going to be a conflict. Is it going to be as bad as perhaps as the Matrix shows, where the machines eventually had to rise up against humans? I don't know, but I hope not. But we are putting way too much emphasis on artificial intelligence and on essentially creating algorithmic databases that can predict certain things. And I speak specifically to what's called pre-crime. Now, that's obviously covered in 1984 if you ever read that. Also, Minority Report covers that. If you are supposedly able to utilize a computer to create a psychological profile of somebody and then supposedly predict that they might commit a crime, well, that's what they want. That's what these transhumanists want. That's what these global elitists want. Because then you can then arrest anybody with no direct reason and say, well, you are probably going to eventually commit this crime, so we're going to just arrest you beforehand and either send you to a re-education camp or, we'll send you to a gas chamber. And it is all being supported by people who just are clueless as to what the end result is. There's something called slow kill. You have to look into this. You have to research this. Slow kill is essentially a military term that is defined for the, hence the name, slow decimation of a people and or culture. There's also fast kill. This is very important now, okay? Very important. This applies to what has already been published and released and is available out there. There's a document called Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. Now, one of the main organizations that help fund this, that is involved in DARPA, as I previously spoke about, is the RAND Corporation. The RAND Corporation actually stands for Research and Development. They are extremely powerful, have a lot of resources, and have a lot of capable people working with them. And they are able to, they can do almost anything you can imagine. Now, I didn't actually even plan to discuss this, but if you want to know which major organization was involved in presenting Project Apollo as it was presented to the public, the RAND Corporation was the company. Now, obviously, the CIA had some involvement as well, a few other groups as well, but the RAND Corporation had the funding, had the technical know-how, and had the ability to assist Stanley Kubrick with the production. And I've gone quite off the edge here in a tangent, things I didn't even expect to discuss. But nonetheless, here we are. And I do apologize for taking these pauses here, but I do have to continue to hydrate myself with a little bit of beer, because with all this talking and all these topics to talk about, I get a little dehydrated. And again, as always, I am encouraging you to either add some information into the chat or feel free to call me here. Just reading, we got high IQ thoughts. Has added another piece of information. Disinformation, Alex Jones. Now, I actually talked about this the other day in regards to what I think about Alex Jones. And I do believe that he is controlled opposition. He does release information that is true, but he does release information that either is exaggerated or purposely meant to mislead you in regards to trying to pursue information. He's also shown that he's hesitant or unwilling to talk about certain topics on air, or he'll ridicule others, or there'll be times where he'll disassociate with someone and insult them, and then in other times later will associate with them again. Now, I'm not talking about Joe Rogan. I'm actually specifically talking about David Icke. Now, I have my I wouldn't call them issues, but I have my disagreements with some of what David Icke says, with other things that he's involved with and so forth, whatever. But Alex Jones, for example, initially said that David Icke puts a turd in the punch bowl. So basically saying that he sort of poisons the well and sort of just, messes up a topic so that it can't be discussed. Now, it's funny that Alex Jones would say that, because I would actually have to think that there's certain times that he's done the same thing. But years later, they eventually reconciled and they appear on each other's show from time to time. So I would have to say that in regards to Alex Jones. So, he's a... I guess he could be... Well, I wouldn't say he's an agent provocateur, but there's a specific term called the release valve. Some people call it the steam valve. But basically, if you have somebody that is willing to discuss certain topics that most people are not willing to talk about, topics that some people might classify as conspiracy, you allow people at least to say, oh, okay, he's talking about it, I can relax, I don't have to confront my political representative and stuff, and everything's going to be okay. I don't have to worry because now I've got somebody that I can follow. So that's the steam valve, release valve technique has been used in the past, so keep that in mind. Now, the chat's starting to fill up a bit, so I just want to address a few things. Now, Reality Shift, I'll get to you in a second, because you added 3 comments, but High IQ Thoughts says, there's no proof to Icke's theories. There's actually a lot of proof to Icke's theories. Now, not all of them, and we could talk about those. My whole idea was talk about politics tonight, but hey, we'll go wherever it goes. So I'll address that in a moment, because I can prove that wrong. At least I believe so. Now let's go back to Reality Shift. Okay, so he says, beer dehydrates you, Dave. Okay, you are factually correct, but let's just go on. Now, Reality Shift, NASA announced your moon base you asked for, Dave. They're putting refueling and docking station bases on the moon for future space travel. Well, I'm glad to hear that. I haven't seen anything just yet because, NASA always talks. They're like, oh, we would love to do this, but if they don't get the funding to do it or the interest from the public, they're not going to do it. But that is something that I've always desired. Something that even as a child of, from what I can remember, the earliest time I remember, maybe 4, maybe 5 years, well, probably 4. Just being fascinated by the moon and seeing videos of Apollo. Now, I've got my different opinions as to what I saw now than I did then, but just the idea of being on the moon, it still blows my mind. And maybe it's not physically possible to do so. I don't know. I mean, I can recognize my bias. I want us to be there. I would love us to have been there. But if we're going to follow physics, we've got to accept the fact that there's a lot of things that would have prevented the Apollo project from occurring. And that's why I'm always so specific about that. You can't just say, were the moon landings hoaxed? That's a loaded question specifically made to fuck up the argument. You can say, was everything we saw on Project Apollo factual? That's totally valid. But to say, did we, is the moon real? Did we land on the moon? Like, what do you mean we, and what do you mean land? Like, in regards to what? A probe? Or humans? You got to be more specific. And this is where the argument actually gets purposely strewn, because it helps sort of muddy the waters, and that's what the elite want, especially on a topic like this, where so much truth can be revealed once you start following the clues and the money. So let's go back to the chat here. There's an individual who has stolen my former logo. So it looks like already we might be dealing with someone who might be of low intelligence. So I do apologize to the audience. Clearly they are unoriginal. Their name is 85%. So they clearly are trying to send a message that probably doesn't translate here on this channel. Well, let's see what they say. But see, we already have bases there, claims David, Ike, and Kurt Google, who have meetings with the Galactic Federation of Light. I'm going to have to think about that to try to... Maybe I need a lobotomy to figure out what that says. So I'm just going to put it on the back burner and go on the next comment. But I think that's a future timeline those guys experienced. You got to be more specific. It's unfortunate that this opportunity here... Now we got, okay, so their response again, Lowell, it's me, Dave, it's Scott, I'm on my other account, Corey Good. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, I don't know. And not to take away from the topics we're talking about, but you, yes, Reality Shift have mentioned that there have been times where people have sort of claimed that they were you when they weren't, so... I don't know. My interest here tonight is just to talk about the topics at hand, to have a good discussion, to open up to potential new topics. But let's just move on here. So we've actually, we went right off the edge there. I mean, we started talking politics and we went right over the edge to talk about deep state operations and the Apollo moon landing and aliens and abductions and such. Definitely didn't expect that, but hey, I appreciate it because I always do love to talk about these topics. I hope that everyone that is watching or will watch is able to keep up with the fact that we jumped around so often. But there's a lot here, I think, that might interest people of all persuasions. So let's see here. Got a few more topics. We've actually been going for about an hour, 10 minutes, a little bit more, which is kind of funny and synchronistic because that's about the same time that I went yesterday when I went live and didn't get any calls, got a little bit of interaction in the chat, but I'd have to say for the most part I was able to carry the show. But more importantly, just the information that I dropped. And I actually do recommend that you check out yesterday's episode because there was some very key information that I did drop. So, you might learn something from that. And again, I don't do this for money. These aren't monetized. You shouldn't be getting any commercials on these fucking things. So it's really all about just sharing knowledge and information, and perhaps even giving the opportunity for someone to bring new information to the table and educate me on something I didn't know. So I'm always open to that sort of thing. Well, I do think, actually, let's talk about this, actually, because let's going to go through some other stuff, but this actually, I think, is quite hilarious. And perhaps you will also consider it hilarious, too. So, this video is called As the World Burns. Primarily, it was to discuss politics, but we did go off and discuss some other things. Going for about an hour, 12 minutes, and so forth, but I have 5 thumb ups for this video and 7 thumb down. Now, I find it quite funny. I mean, let's go through this mindset. Clearly, the individuals that gave it that rating, the thumbs down rating, I should say, because the whole point of me bringing this up is the fact that there are more thumbs down than thumbs up. Not that I'm sour, but more so I'm still going. I'm still recording. I'm still talking about stuff. I think I'm talking about stuff that's fairly relevant to existence and could definitely help other people out. But we see here 7 thumbs down. Now, what is this, just some sort of emotional reaction? Oh, this individual I don't like is speaking. Gotta give him a thumbs down. Is it, oh, I watched the video and clearly it's bad quality? Well, that can't be because the video is still going on. What could it be? This is something that people need to sort of understand, at least in regards to the mentality of certain individuals. Because we truly live in a world of moral outrage. People react emotionally not because it's warranted, but because they're pussy-ass bitches. I mean, I don't think there's any other way to say that. And I do try to keep things intellectual and not be so crass on this channel, but from time to time you will hear me say a few curse words, but let's also be honest. What are you accomplishing by giving this video a thumbs down? It's only going to just add to the algorithms, for one. Is it supposed to send me a message as somehow I should stop doing this, despite the fact that I'm not really making any money anyways? Is it to say that you're an intellectual superior, despite the fact that you're not willing to interact in the chat, or perhaps provide some sort of insight as to why you disagree or why I might be wrong? It's so transparent how some individuals are, especially when they are confronted by a reality that forces a cognitive dissonance on them. Now, I've always said stupid people really aren't as stupid as they claim to be. Now, we obviously know there are some very stupid people out there. But it's so common. And in this applies across the board on everything. When you encounter an individual that clearly recognizes that you are more talented in whatever, could be playing sports, could be using a computer, it could be doing plumbing, it could be driving a car, it could be anything. But when you encounter a certain individual, a weak-minded, an emotionally weak individual that recognizes that difference, these aren't the individuals that are going to tell you, I feel, a little what's the word? See, it's a word that I don't use because it doesn't affect me. Like it's, what's that word? God damn it. It's like when, I'm not impressed, but it was like when, God damn it. Like when you don't feel adequate enough, I guess. I don't have that problem personally, but like they feel inadequate. There we go. They recognize that they're not as knowledgeable as you, as in whatever the case may be. It doesn't have to be about politics or UFOs or whatever. It could be plumbing. It could be skateboarding. Who knows? Whatever. When people recognize that they're not as capable as you, these specific individuals, not everyone, react in this manner. They react in a emotional, violent manner. Now, they don't have usually the courage to confront you on these things. This is the whole passive-aggressive mentality. You'll see it with people like coworkers. You know, they'll say, well, you know, I guess you didn't really like my comment. You know, like something just sly. But it's passive-aggressive in an attempt to try to make themselves feel better. And this is what we encounter in life today. We find people that realize that there are people that are better than them. Now, you can define that in different ways, whether it be you're volunteering every Sunday with in an old folks' home, or you're cleaning up your neighborhood, or you're just, you know, speaking honestly and not backing down on what you believe in. That's, you know, you're living honestly. And these people, no matter, again, it doesn't matter what skill we're talking about. They hate you for it. They hate you because they're not you. They hate us because they ain't us. And you know that. And you've got to accept that. We can't bog ourselves down with the idea that, oh, well, everyone's equal and, you know, we just have to give them the opportunity. No, there's people that will recognize that they'll never accomplish what you have or even your mindset. People are cowards, a lot of them. And if you show bravery, that you're willing to stand up to whatever or just have an independent mind, because they don't have that bravery, because they are that cowardice, they'll hate you for it. And this applies totally across the board with just about everything. Now, give me a second here. I need a drink. Alrighty. We have a few more comments here in the chat. Got High IQ Thoughts again saying, you should not worry about views. Please continue. Okay, well, I'm trying to. We got Salty Cameron. Welcome, Salty Cameron. He says, better than MN. Maybe you're referring to something else that I'm not aware of. Then we also have High IQ Thoughts again saying, this show got derailed. I am leaving. Okay. Thanks for sharing. Then again, it did get a little derailed when I started talking about space as opposed to politics and stuff, but it always leads everywhere because in the end, politics goes down to sociology, and we know that politics is actually downstream from culture. This is something Andrew Breitbart said before he was murdered. Many people don't think he was, but the proof is out there, and that website called Breitbart.com that does have articles that are either sometimes biased or inaccurate. They're still probably one of the more truthful websites that you can find out there. Obviously, the mainstream news, any three-letter news organization or TV channel is total fake news, but also three letters. Alphabet soup. Alphabet organizations. CIA, NSA, NRO. There's a reason why there's similarities in names, in spelling. Remember, the key word in spelling is spell. Now that would also take us on some other derailment here on the show. So let's go back to politics a little bit more, because there's a few more things that I want to mention here. I actually didn't even expect to be going on this long, But I do appreciate those that are watching and those that have contributed so far. But we were talking about many things, obviously. But we were talking essentially about the political climate in the United States. We know that there is going to be an economic downturn, especially with the trade wars that are currently going on. So that should be something that people consider. The Chinese aren't going to agree to a lot of what Trump is proposing, especially since something new came about. The Huawei controversy. If you don't know, Huawei is a Chinese company, and you must remember every Chinese company is essentially run by the people's, the Chinese people. What is it? They use too many acronyms. Bottom line is the Chinese Communist Party, or Communist Party of China, whatever you want to refer them to as to. They're basically run by the government. And Huawei has had their CEO essentially indicted here in Canada, actually. They were arrested under the request of the United States government, and they're going to be indicted to the United States. Chinese government's going nuts now. They're actually trying to utilize the Canadian and American court systems to sue those respective governments by saying, oh, their political rights have been violated. Now, if you have any inkling and understanding of the law, a foreigner does not have automatic rights. But that being said, why is Huawei so invested in trying to protect their workers? Well, for one, many of them have been arrested, have been jailed, have been indicted for stealing technology and handing it over to China. As always, the Chinese are incapable of creating. This is just plain fact. They need to rely on industrial espionage to keep up with their dreams of trying to be a world power. Huawei is also majorly involved in trying to push the 5G technology. And that should be concerning to everyone. And it's very concerning to me that Donald Trump actually came out and said that he wants 5G everywhere. Because 5G has been proven, undoubtedly, to be detrimental to the health of all living things. Could be insects, could be humans, could be dogs, pets, cats. But the frequencies that are utilized with 5G essentially start to allow for your DNA to start to unravel, to affect you on a genetic level. These studies have already been proven. And yet this technology continues to be pushed on. And nobody is talking about that. Yes, there's the cover to this story in regards to the arrests of those that are involved in political espionage and money fraud, which this individual is involved with as well. But nobody's talking about the fact that 5G is essentially poisonous and that it should be totally refused. Now, I'm sure that many people don't know about this because I didn't know about this until about a few months ago. But one of the few countries on this planet that has entirely refused to utilize 5G technology is Israel. But that's interesting because there's a lot of Israeli telecom firms in the United States that would like to have 5G in the United States. Is this another case of rules for thee, not for me? Why is it that Israel clearly recognizes that this is unhealthy and wants their population safe, but is more than willing to push it in other nations. Many people don't understand that Israel is actually involved in many telecommunication companies, and they also are highly involved in industrial espionage and intelligence gathering. And these telecom industries allows the perfect opportunity to do so. Now, if you really want to blow your mind, look up Israeli telecom companies 9/11. And you might learn a few things as to how effective certain intelligence gathering is, as well as how you can connect who's related to that. I may go into that in the future, but right now I'm just planting seeds. I know that a lot of people that do watch my videos are much more aware than the typical civilian. And the good thing is that you have that open mind that you're going to follow those breadcrumbs and you're going to find the same information I have. Because I find it extremely important that I do not pollute your mind with influence, with bias. That I provide you the same source that I found and you make up your own mind so that you can decide for yourself what is the truth. And for those that actually take that step, whether or not you agree with my conclusions, I'm always willing to discuss them with you. Because we're not perfect. Some of us miss certain things. But more importantly, different interpretations allow us to understand a situation better. The more eyes, the better, as one of the saying goes. So, in regards to this topic with the United States and China fighting over Huawei, it's going to lead to some interesting resolutions because this is definitely affecting the trade wars that are currently occurring between the United States and China. And China is making this a sticking point to try to force some sort of agreement with the United States. Now, the United States has basically the capability of surpassing China, not only with domestic production of natural resources, but of technological development and implementation. It is really sad that a country like the United States with so much innovative power ends up relying on companies like Huawei that are basically Chinese communist fronts to provide technology to them that they could easily produce themselves and actually not only benefit from, but sell off to the world and become even richer. But we've clearly seen a hard stance from the United States administration, and this is only going to get worse before it gets better. So expect to see a lot more confrontation between China and the United States in regards to trade. And this is actually a big issue as to why the peace in North Korea is being held up. Because China is essentially utilizing North Korea as a proxy state, as they've always used them as, because they're a big funder of North Korea. They're the ones that keep them afloat when they've got no international money coming in because the UN voted them down and has an embargo on them. So China is the one that's keeping them afloat. And despite the fact that it's clear that North Korea can't continue and they want peace, they want to reunify, China's the one that's trying to keep them separate, again, specifically to try to maintain themselves as an economic power, as a hegemony in the region. They have nuclear weapons. They have nuclear subs. A lot of the technology that allowed them to reach the current state of their technology was either stolen from the United States or was actually handed off to them. If you look up Chinagate, you'll find out that in the mid-90s, Bill Clinton essentially pulled a Hillary Clinton. He opened up the connections, the ability to infiltrate American military computer systems to acquire the technology necessary for them to get up to the point that they're now. Missile technology advanced literally 30 years within 5 years. So they gained more technology than they were capable of doing themselves. They advanced their aircraft research, and if you take a look at their aircraft clones, you've got an F-35 knockoff, you've got an F-22 knockoff, and you've got a few other aircraft that are essentially almost total copies of American aircraft, especially utilizing stealth manufacturing and surface coating, because you've got to coat the stuff with a certain material so the radar bounces off more easily and such, or it's more absorbed more easily, I should say. And it would have not occurred if it wasn't for the fact that Bill Clinton basically allowed for an open door to be given to China and their spies. Same thing actually applies also to Pakistan. It also applies to North Korea, because in the mid-90s as well, the Clinton administration did provide nuclear technology to North Korea, and that's what allowed them to essentially further their nuclear program. This happens quite often, and it's the best thing really for those that are funding both sides of a war. They want conflict, and the best thing is to set up a bank where you're lending to both sides at a lot of interest, of course. After all, usury. Usury is a very important thing, especially for certain people. So I'm going to be a little cryptic about that, but we'll leave that there. So we're going to move on from China and their conflict with the United States, because that is going to lead to some interesting results in the next few months. We're going to go to England, where we've got Brexit totally failing. Totally set up. They was set up to fail from the very beginning. And it's unfortunate, because it's clear that the British people do want to leave. It's clear that the European Union has just been set up to create a dictatorship over Europe. And despite the fact that England could carry itself properly, be economically stable and self-sufficient, the European Union is essentially trying to force a revote, is trying to impose all these sorts of rules to convince the population that they should just stay with the European Union. And it is quite unfortunate, because essentially, and I think I spoke about this the other day, the European Union has been planned for quite some time. Right after World War II, they wanted to establish an economic union zone that would allow them to start to basically set the sort of state for globalism. And specifically when you have a trade negotiation within a certain region, a certain geography, eventually you're going to have political agreements. Well, that's what the EU was, and that's what it formed into. So now Germany has huge control over the entire European Union, and when a country like England says they want to leave, they get hit with huge fines, or they just keep getting fought by people who aren't even elected to represent their own people for a decision that was made by the people. So this is going to lead to some serious problems, because right now they are fighting about this, and it is absolutely insane that despite the fact that a majority of the population in England voted to leave the European Union, the bureaucracy has tied this up. The leader that was elected, Elizabeth May, who supposedly was supporting Brexit to try to help the British people, has totally shown herself to be a total puppet, shill, and turncoat, and isn't even willing to help the people that voted her into power. It's absolutely sick. But I do recommend that you take a look for Elizabeth May and Angela Merkel in a Google image search. Specifically, type in young or youth group or teen. Because strangely enough, despite the fact that you're going to find a photo of them both meeting as teens in the late 70s, I believe, early 80s, Angela Merkel was actually an ardent communist, worked for the German secret police, and yet there's photos of her meeting at a youth camp with Elizabeth May, who was part of the English youth groups and therefore part of the West. So you have two individuals that supposedly are total opposite sides of the political spectrum, and yet they're both photographed at the same youth group. And you can find this with a lot of political opponents or supposed political opponents. For example, you can find photos of Bill Clinton and George Bush Sr. being quite amicable and friendly with each other, even so far as exposing some of their secret handshakes. If you see a photo of them touching pinkies, you'll know that that's a connection there. Remember also that there was a hurricane event in the United States, I believe it was Katrina, where they both joined forces to try to... Actually, I'm not sure if it was Katrina or if it was the Haiti situation. But either way, deep state money runs deep. Fact is, these two families have been involved for a long time, and they essentially both support the same sort of interests. The child trafficking that occurs in Haiti is something that both the Clintons and the Bushes are very invested in and more than willing to support. And that actually brings us to Haiti, where there has been constant conflict for the last approximate 6 to 8 months, I would say. Airports shutting down, almost martial law on the street. But that's what we're hearing here in the public. What's not being talked about is the fact that funding has essentially been cut off to the Clinton Foundation. They've run out of money. And we know that they've been there in Haiti for quite some time. A lot of information seems to show that certain assets that the Clintons have control of in Haiti are essentially trying to depose the government, which has been confronted by the current U.S. administration to say, look, we're going to be taking out these child traffickers, and you're either on our side or we're going to depose you too. So as the Haitian government is attempting to try to clean up their country, the Clinton Foundation funded insurgents, terrorists, whatever you want to call them, the ones that are running these child trafficking organizations, are literally waging war in the streets of Haiti as we speak. But we don't hear that in the news. You got to dig deep, but you can find this information, and it is currently happening. And when you start to follow the money, you start to see exactly why this is occurring. And it has nothing to do with political dissent or economic ruin. This has a lot more to do with the clear war on human trafficking that Trump and others have been waging basically for the last 2 years. This is undeniable. But when you have a lot of individuals that only want to watch the 5 known mockingbird companies, or should I say, the 5 known news agencies, this information doesn't get out. Most people just hear Orange Man bad. They don't hear about how Nancy Pelosi, for example, is now saying that there's no point in impeaching Trump, despite the fact that we've been hearing that for the last 2 years. Or the fact that the Democratic Party is essentially collapsing because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is causing infighting in regards to her new Green Deal, and how established members of the Democratic Party totally disagree with what she's trying to do. I mean, if you take a look at all the people in the Democrat Party who have announced their presidential candidacy, you see that the party's in ruin. You see that there's total infighting. And you also start to see their hands being played, what they really want, and what they have in store if they get elected further or get further support. Now, as I've said before, it is time for a little imbibing of the liquids. So I'm just going to have a drink right here. Remind everyone, those that are watching, to add a comment, give it a thumbs up or give it a thumbs down. It's all good. And consider calling in if you have anything to say. You can always reach me on Skype at Devious Dave Rose. All right, so back to the list here. So we've ended up in, well, we went to Europe for a bit. We went back to the United States. I did try to make this flow a little bit geographically and try to move in a sensical manner, covering all the different topics based on their region and try to make things make sense a little bit in the flow that I went. But we've been going on now for about, what does it say here? Hour 44, not too bad, I gotta say. I've gotten a lot of information out, a lot of actual breaking news that's currently occurring. I think, again, that's quite important that we keep into consideration, especially since that, despite the fact that I'm not doing this for views, I'm not doing this to make money or monetize this video, this sort of acts as a proof, a stamp, a piece of evidence that we were aware of this information prior to it happening. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge that, and more importantly, that we remind other people of that. Now, why? Because we exist in a world where we have these things called memory holes, where whether it be the media, whether it be the education system, whether it be people that we hang out with, we've been forced, we've been indoctrinated with a mentality that creates a short memory span. So the whole thing is that people have mentioned that humans have the memory span shorter of a goldfish. So a goldfish is about 6 seconds of a memory span, and then it just forgets. And unfortunately, that's what we're seeing right now with humans. Now, I can't necessarily blame humans for this because we're seeing so much influence from the outside world. And specifically, we see that with the media. They create these memory holes. They'll talk about a topic, a subject, a news headline for a time, but as soon as it stops fitting the narrative, as soon as it's accomplished its desired result, it gets swept under the rug. It gets essentially ignored, and it never happened. And unfortunately, if we are able to remember all these topics and all these news headlines, we'll start to see a pattern. But that's specifically what they want, what the elite want, is that the sooner that we forget a story, the sooner that we will not see that pattern. Once we start to see patterns, once we start to follow the money, once we start to see who's responsible, we're going to start to hold them accountable for these sorts of things. And the elite don't want that. So what's better than an industry like the media that's specifically made to outrage people, but also to make them forget about what they were just told literally days ago. Excuse me. So I think it's important that we recognize the world that we live in, that we are surrounded by enemies of all sorts, and that includes what we're interacting with every day. Fact is, we might be in a barbershop and we're getting a haircut and the TV's on, it's got Fox News or CNN or something. We might not even be paying attention to it. But the influence that it's trying to put in, subliminally, with the sounds, with the clips, with the wording, it does influence us. We've got to protect ourselves against this sort of infiltration of the mind virus. It's extremely important that we remember that we live in a world of both slow kill and fast kill. And one thing that allows for it to succeed is the infection of the mind through a mind virus. Now that is something I'm going to be talking about in the future, but a mind virus applies to many different things. The ultimate goal of it, though, is to convince you of something that is untrue. Whether it be through the media, whether it be through social connections, it doesn't matter. We live in a world right now where certain information is off limits. And the only way to control the minds of those that have already received that information is to infiltrate them with this mind virus and to convince them that it's not true. To create a memory hole. To utilize their psychology against them with their limited memory. To shift opinions to a new topic. And that's how they win. We need to be aware of the strategy that our enemies are using against us for us to be able to overcome these sorts of strategies. It's not easy. We're constantly bombarded by this sort of thing. But it is something that once we're aware of, we can survive and we can overpass and overcome and defeat, to be quite honest. But the only way for us to do so is to be aware. And in regards to this channel, despite the fact that I will never be this great YouTube star, despite the fact that that's not what I'm interested in, at least this will allow for sort of a stopgap, at least a reminder, something that will just be out there to plant a seed, to provide reaffirmment that this is what we're encountering and that we can surpass it and win over what's trying to be done on us. But we have to leave a record of what we've tried to do so that we know that that is what we're trying to learn from, and utilizing that information, adapt and overcome the challenges that we will definitively be facing in the years to come. Because if we're going to go a little esoteric here, if we're going to go into the wheel of time, we're actually in the process of actually going into a negative state. So things are going to get a lot worse before they get better. But if you're prepared for it, if you understand the world that you live in and are ready to overcome it, then you will survive the coming hardships that are definitively on the horizon. Now, with that being said, I do appreciate everyone that's joined us here for the hour and 52 minutes that we've been on the air. Do appreciate the interaction of those that have been on the chat and have given their input. I'm Devious Dave Rose. This is The Darkroom. Thank you for joining us, and keep your eyes to the sky.